Botany's Bounty. Chapter 1, Desperate Transmission. The flickering red emergency lights painted the cramped cockpit a bloody hue. James Hawkeye Hayes slammed his cybernetic eyes shut, the artificial implant overloading with the sheer number of alerts screaming through the ship's failing console. Sweat beaded on his brow, mixing with the faint scent of ozone and burnt wires. "Junk heap," he muttered, his voice hoarse. His hand, wrapped in scarred leather, wrestled with the control yoke, trying to wrestle the rickety freighter, the rusty nail, out of the oversized cyborg's iron grip. The bounty target, a hulking monstrosity of salvaged metal and pulsating cybernetics, dwarfed the nail by 3 times. Sparks flew from its metallic claws as it squeezed tighter, its single glowing red eye boring into the freighter's hull. The air grew thin, the warning klaxon on the console whining its mournful song. "Come on, baby!" Hayes gritted his teeth, his knuckles white on the control yoke. He flicked a switch, rerouting dwindling power to the forward thrusters. The rusty engines groaned in protest, sending a shudder through the ship. Just a little more? A new sound pierced the din, a high-pitched whine cutting through the static. Hayes slammed a calloused finger against the comm button. Crackling static filled the cockpit for a moment, then a voice, calm and melodic, broke through. "This is an emergency transmission," it spoke, the voice unlike anything Hayes had ever heard. It seemed to shimmer and rustle, like leaves caught in a gentle breeze. Hayes frowned, squinting at the comms panel. "Origin?" he barked, his voice gruff. "Unidentified sector," the voice replied, a hint of urgency creeping into its tone. "Please, is anyone there? We are in desperate need of assistance." Hayes hesitated. Unidentified sectors were usually trouble brewing, trouble he usually steered clear of. But something about the voice, the raw desperation emanating from it, snagged at him. He sighed, rubbing a hand across his face. "This is James Hayes," he finally said, his voice gruff. "What's your situation?" Silence. The static filled the air once more. Hayes cursed under his breath, just about to close the comm channel when the voice returned. We are under attack," it whispered, the sound laced with fear. "A relentless enemy. Please, can you help us?" Hayes stared out the viewport at the monstrosity trying to crush his ship. A humorless chuckle escaped his lips. He wasn't sure who needed rescuing more, him or whoever was on the other end of that comm line. He took a deep breath, a decision already forming in his mind. "Depends," he said, his voice steady. "Tell me who you are and what you're up against." There was a long pause, then a sigh, almost like the rustling of leaves in the wind. "We are the Sylvans," the voice said, its tone filled with a strange blend of hope and resignation. "And our enemy?" Chapter 2, A Sylvan Plea. The rusty groaning of the freighter's engines finally sputtered to a halt. Silence settled over the cockpit, broken only by the ragged gasp coming from Hayes's lips. He slumped back in the pilot's chair, exhaustion weighing heavily on him. A glance at the viewport showed the cyborg bounty target, a mangled mess after Hayes managed to lure it into an asteroid field. The emergency lights switched to a dull red, bathing the cockpit in an eerie glow. He winced, the throbbing pain from his cybernetic eye a constant reminder of the fight. "You all right, Captain?" the voice from the comm system asked, a touch of concern in its tone. Hayes grunted, reaching up to massage the implant. "Alive," he mumbled. "Barely. What about you people? Did you survive the attack?" For now," the voice replied after a beat, "but our situation remains precarious." Hayes sighed. He hadn't planned on getting entangled in some unknown conflict, but something about the voice, the sheer desperation in it, resonated with something deep within him. He cursed himself for his soft spot. "All right," he finally said, resignation lacing his voice. "Tell me what you're up against." There was another long pause, filled with static. Then the voice resumed. "Our enemies are called the Hive," it explained hesitantly. "A race of insectoid creatures driven by a single purpose: consumption. They have devoured countless worlds, leaving nothing but barren husks in their wake." Hayes frowned. He'd heard rumors of the Hive, nightmarish creatures that haunted the fringes of explored space. But to think they were real. "And you, the Sylvans," he said, piecing things together. "What are you?" The voice seemed to hesitate. "We are different," it finally said. "We are a race of sentient plants, living in harmony with nature. Our world is a haven of life, a stark contrast to the Hive's relentless hunger. Hayes stared out the viewport at the vast black expanse of space. Sentient plants? He scoffed internally. This whole thing sounded like some kind of bad space opera, but yet there was a sincerity in the voice that made him doubt his instincts. "And how exactly do you expect me to help you?" he asked, his voice laced with skepticism. A long silence followed. Hayes was about to write the whole thing off as a hallucination brought on by near-death experience when the voice spoke again. The hatch at the back of the cockpit hissed open, revealing a figure unlike anything Hayes had ever seen. It was humanoid in shape, but its body was composed of an intricate network of vines and leaves, shimmering with an otherworldly bioluminescence. A single beautiful flower bloomed from its chest, pulsating with a gentle light. "We understand your doubt, Captain Hayes," the voice spoke, emanating from the otherworldly figure. "But we have something that could change the tide of this war, something that could stop the Hive's relentless advance." Hayes watched, speechless, as the figure extended a tendril towards him, a small, pulsating sphere nestled within its grasp. Chapter 3: Ghosts of War. The unearthly figure, a luminescent plant being bathed in the dim emergency lights, remained motionless, its tendril outstretched towards Hayes. The pulsating sphere in its grasp held a strange allure, a faint hum emanating from its depths. Hayes stared, his mind racing. This was beyond anything he'd encountered in his years traversing the dusty corners of the galaxy. A sentient plant, a race facing extinction, and a mysterious weapon all colliding in his rickety freighter. He slowly reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and brushed his fingertips against the sphere. A jolt of energy surged through him, a wave of information flooding his mind. Images flashed before his eyes, sprawling cities built from living wood, vibrant ecosystems teeming with life, and then came the Hive. Monstrous insectoids with chitinous exoskeletons swarmed across the idyllic landscapes, leaving behind a trail of desolation. Finally, he saw the weapon, a biobomb, a marvel of botanical engineering that could supposedly eradicate the Hive with a single detonation. The information overload subsided as abruptly as it began, leaving him shaken and confused. "What is this?" Hayes finally managed to croak, his voice hoarse. "This, Captain," the voice spoke, a hint of sorrow lacing its gentle tone, "is our last hope, the seed of entropy. It harnesses the destructive power of nature itself and can turn the tide of this war." Hayes looked at the sphere, its pulsating rhythm mesmerizing. The weight of the situation, the potential for unimaginable destruction, pressed down on him. He glanced back at the viewport, the wreckage of the cyborg bounty target, a stark reminder of the brutality of the world outside. "You're asking me to unleash a weapon of mass destruction?" he finally said, his voice low. "Desperate times call for desperate measures, Captain," the voice replied, the single flower on its chest dimming slightly. "The Hive shows no mercy. They will consume everything in their path if left unchecked." A bitter chuckle escaped Hayes' lips. He knew about unchecked consumption. He'd seen it firsthand, the greed and violence that had ravaged countless worlds, humanity included. His past as a decorated war hero, a past riddled with controversial decisions, clawed at his conscience. A holographic projection flickered to life within the cockpit, shimmering above the control panel. It depicted a younger Hayes, clad in military fatigues, fighting alongside other humans and the very same plant beings he was facing now. They were defending a lush green world against a swarm of insectoid creatures. The image shifted, showing a strategic retreat ordered by Hayes, a retreat that many deemed cowardly and cost countless lives. Shame washed over him, a familiar sensation. He shut his eyes, the holographic image flickering out. "You know of my past," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We do," the voice confirmed. "You were called a hero, then a villain. But beneath that hardened exterior, we sense a spark of good remains." Hayes slammed his fist against the control panel, a surge of anger momentarily burning away the self-loathing. Was that all he was? A spark of good buried beneath layers of cynicism? He looked at the plant being, its bioluminescent glow filling the cockpit with an ethereal light. "Why me?" he asked, his voice laced with a mixture of anger and despair. A long silence followed. Then the voice spoke, soft and filled with a strange wisdom. "Because, Captain," it said, "sometimes redemption comes from the most unexpected places." Hayes stared at the seat of entropy, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. Could helping these plant beings be his chance at redemption? Or was he simply stepping into another war, another conflict with unknown consequences? He didn't have the answers, but one thing was clear. His past and the future were about to collide in a way he never imagined. Chapter 4, Into the Hive. The stench of decay and rotting chitin assaulted Hayes's nostrils the moment the airlock hissed open. He squinted, his eyes adjusting to the dim, flickering light of the Hive landing platform. The air shimmered with a strange heat, and an unsettling hum vibrated through the metallic floor. Flora, the sentient plant being, stood beside him, its bioluminescent glow casting an otherworldly light on the desolate landscape. The Hive world stretched out before them, a wasteland of jagged rock formations and skeletal structures resembling giant insect exoskeletons. "Welcome to our nightmare," Flora's voice whispered, a tremor of fear running through it. Hayes swallowed, a lump forming in his throat. This was unlike anything he'd encountered in his scavenging days. This was raw, primal horror given form. He gripped the worn leather satchel holding the seat of entropy, its faint hum a constant reminder of the destructive power he carried. "All right," he finally said, his voice raspy. "Plan?" Flora extended a tendril, brushing it against a metallic panel embedded in the landing platform. A hissing sound filled the air as a hidden compartment slid open, revealing a set of strange, segmented armor suits. "These will provide a basic disguise," Flora explained. "They mimic the Hive workers, allowing us to blend in for a short time." Hayes eyed the armor suits with suspicion. They looked more like chitinous carapaces than anything a human would wear. But he didn't have a better option. With a sigh, he helped Flora don the suit, the segmented pieces clicking into place with surprising ease. He squeezed into his own, the metallic material cold and slick against his skin. "Let's just hope this doesn't give me the creeps," he muttered, his voice muffled by the helmet. Flora's flower pulsed a faint blue, a color he interpreted as amusement. "We have limited time," she said. "The Hive operates on a rigid schedule. We need to reach the bioengineering labs before the next worker shift." They ventured out onto the landing platform, their movements echoing eerily in the vast, cavernous space. Swarms of winged insectoid creatures buzzed overhead, their mandibles clicking in a rhythmic pattern. Hayes felt a wave of nausea as he watched a massive, slug-like creature ooze past, its slimy body leaving a trail of glistening mucus. Following Flora's lead, they navigated a labyrinth of tunnels and metallic corridors. The air grew thicker, the stench of decay overpowering. Occasionally, they encountered other Hive workers, scuttling creatures with vacant eyes and clicking mandibles. Hayes forced himself to appear nonchalant, his years of experience in undercover operations kicking in. They finally reached a massive metal door, emblazoned with a pulsating, bioluminescent symbol. Flora placed a tendril against a scanner panel on the side, a series of clicks and whirs confirming their fake identities. With a hiss, the door slid open, revealing a brightly lit laboratory filled with rows of bubbling vats and strange, pulsating machines. Hayes's heart hammered in his chest. This was it, the chance to end this war, to perhaps redeem himself. But a sense of dread gnawed at him. This sterile lab, with its humming machinery and grotesque experiments, felt cold and calculating. These weren't mindless bugs anymore. They were a civilization, twisted and horrifying, but a civilization nonetheless. "The seed of entropy must be placed within the central core," Flora's voice whispered, its tone filled with urgency. "It will then trigger a cascade reaction, disrupting the Hive's bioengineering process." Hayes nodded, his gaze scanning the lab. Armed guards, monstrous hybrids of insect and machine, patrolled the rows of vats. He knew a head-on attack was out of the question. He needed a HFY solution, a way to use his human ingenuity to win. Suddenly, a booming voice echoed through the lab, causing Hayes to flinch. "Sector 7, report! Efficiency levels are dropping!" Flora froze, its flower dimming in panic. Hayes cursed under his breath. They'd been discovered. He needed a distraction, something big enough to get past the guards and buy himself time. A mischievous grin spread across his face. He'd spent years dodging bounty hunters and space pirates. Taking down some bug men wouldn't be any different. Chapter 5, Descent and Sacrifice. Hayes snatched a vial filled with a pulsating green liquid from a nearby workbench. He didn't know what it was, but the pungent odor and the bioluminescent glow suggested it wasn't something pleasant. With a silent prayer, he smashed the vial against the metal floor. The lab filled with a thick green fog that rolled across the rows of vats like a living entity. The insectoid guards screeched in alarm, their clicking mandibles becoming frantic. The sound echoed through the chamber, momentarily drowning out the booming voice demanding a report. "What did you do?" Flora hissed, its voice laced with fear. "Improvisation," Hayes grunted, his voice muffled by the helmet. The fog proved more effective than he'd anticipated. The guards, blinded and disoriented, stumbled around the lab, their metallic claws scraping against the floor. Hayes used the chaos to his advantage, grabbing Flora's arm and sprinting towards the central core, a massive pulsating sphere at the heart of the lab. They weaved through the bewildered guards, the air thick with the acrid stench of the green fog. Several guards spotted them and lumbered after, their clicking mandibles forming a maddening chorus. Hayes glanced behind him. They were gaining ground. He cursed, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He needed to act fast. "I'll distract them," he shouted over the din, his voice distorted by the helmet. "Get the seed in and get out of here." Flora's flower pulsed a frantic red, a color Hayes interpreted as protest. "No, we do this together." "There's no time," Hayes roared, shoving Flora towards the central core. He drew his trusty plasma pistol, the familiar weight a source of comfort amidst the chaos. Turning, he faced the lumbering guards, the green fog swirling around them like a ghostly shroud. He raised the pistol, a wry grin twisting his lips. Maybe redemption wasn't about wiping the slate clean. Maybe it was about making a stand, even if it meant going down swinging. He unleashed a torrent of plasma blasts, the emerald energy bolts carving through the insectoid exoskeletons. Guards screeched and fell, their bodies dissolving into pools of acidic green goo. He knew it wouldn't be enough, but he fought with a ferocity born of desperation and a newfound sense of purpose. Flora reached the central core, its tendril wrapping around the sphere. A blinding flash of light erupted as the seed of entropy detonated, the bioengineering lab shaking with the force of the explosion. Hayes was thrown back by the shockwave, his vision momentarily obscured. When the dust settled, the lab was a scene of utter chaos. Wires sparked, machines sputtered, and the acrid smell of burning metal filled the air. The green fog had dissipated, revealing the carnage Hayes had wrought. He looked for Flora, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. Then he saw it, a broken section of the lab ceiling, daylight streaming through, and beneath it, a single glowing vine stretching desperately towards the light. Grief washed over him, heavy and suffocating. He had failed. He had lost Flora, his one chance at redemption. A primal scream ripped from his throat, a sound filled with a mixture of rage and despair. But amidst the wreckage, a faint, bioluminescent glow caught his eye. Nestled amidst the debris lay the seed of entropy, somehow shielded from the full force of the explosion. A single, beautiful flower bloomed from its surface, pulsing weakly but undeniably alive. Hayes stared at it, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. Flora might be gone, but its sacrifice had not been in vain. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and picked up the seed. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing. He wasn't done fighting. He would carry Flora's memory and the seed of entropy with him, fueled by a desire to end this war and perhaps find his own redemption along the way.